Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. What I want to do now is look ahead to the weekend where we are looking at a monster visitor weekend at St. John's. Okay, so St. John's, you may have heard us talk about them a little bit during the season. Rick Pitino goes there, Big Rick energy. We know all about it. Oh, by the way, he puts together a Big East regular season champ. He puts together a Big East tournament champ. And obviously the season ended a little bit disappointing in Providence in the second round, but it doesn't change the fact that it's an incredible season. And worth noting, doesn't change the fact that he has already to date had an incredible offseason. We know the RJ Lewis stuff got weird. I don't think there's really any scenario at this point that he's coming back to St. John's, probably to the NBA, maybe stays in the portal, whatever. But in addition, two very nice commitments out of the portal. Bryce Hopkins from Providence. I love Bryce Hopkins. Listen, banged up the last 2 years in that 22-23 season. He was an all Big East guy. And then Josan Sanan, who to me is the ultimate Pitino guy. Crazy athletic, skills are there, upside is there. He just needs good coaching to bring it out of him. Sorry if I'm being disrespectful to Arizona State. It's just the truth. But there's still very clearly some spots that Rick Pitino needs filled. Should mention, by the way, Zuby Ejiofor also among the returnees coming back. Like I said, though, spots need filling. And why I bring it up is because St. John's is hosting one of the craziest portal visit weekends that maybe – I think it's the craziest one we've seen this offseason, but maybe one of the craziest ones we've ever seen. And if things go to plan, this could be the weekend that launches St. John's to another Big East regular season title, another Big East tournament title, maybe a Final Four, maybe more in 2025, 2026. So very quickly, I'll give you a little context here. The four players that are projected to visit, and we know that it's always subject to change in portal season, but guard, Ian Jackson, you may have heard of him, North Carolina. We'll get to him in a minute. Xaivian Lee, guard, Providence. I keep saying Providence. It's Princeton. He went to Princeton. Ivy League. I keep saying Providence in my head. He's obviously gone to Princeton. Torres needs to calm down. Ozziah Sellers, a wing from Stanford. And Dylan Mitchell, a forward, former McDonald's All-American from Cincinnati, previously played at Texas. So yeah, that's who's going to be visiting this weekend if all goes to plan. And this is how big this weekend has got in St. John's circles. They're calling it on Twitter, hashtag the mega haul. Okay, in other words, if we get all these guys, it's not just a haul, it's a mega haul. I think intern Drew, who helps run the Torres on SJU account, may have helped create this, but you could see it, the mega haul. You got the U-Haul there with St. John's basketball. You got the Cosmo Kramer. Remember, there was the rotisserie chicken place. He was only seeing red there for a few days. If you're watching on YouTube, there's Dan Hurley peeking in as Rick Pitino is counting his money. So St. John's fans have certainly made this into a thing. The memes are incredible. I love every single one. By the way, shout out to the 2 or 3 that were definitely not appropriate for a family show like this. But the mega haul is officially a thing. So let's get into a couple of these players. How likely are they commit? How likely that they don't commit? And what does it mean for St. John's in 2025, 2026? First guy I want to talk about. He's actually the guy that's probably going to visit last this weekend. I think the last 3 I mentioned are expected on Friday, Saturday. Ian Jackson from North Carolina is expected to visit on Saturday into Sunday. Okay. So we've talked a lot about Ian Jackson. We did a video when he entered the portal. And I said it right away, and I'm not claiming that I'm some genius, that I have access to all this information that everybody else has, that everybody else does not have. But when Ian Jackson enters the portal right away, St. John's becomes the immediate obvious landing spot. 1, they need guards. 2, they got the money. 3, Ian Jackson is from the New York tri-state area. And 4, as you remember, when Rick Pitino took over, Ian Jackson was going into his senior year, so it was his late junior year. And basically his entire summer of his junior year into senior year, he had to answer question after question after question after question about, are you going to flip specifically to St. John's? I mean, we joked about it the other day. I think he probably was asked on the record at least 20 times during his junior year into his senior year and then his senior year, are you going to flip to St. John's? I actually felt bad for the kid at a certain point because it was like, how many more times can you ask this kid? But at the same time, He does enter the portal. St. John's was always going to be the obvious landing spot. They're getting him on campus. Listen, I know it was an up and down year for Ian Jackson. We talked about it the other day. The final 7 games of his season at North Carolina, he did not score in double figures. It doesn't change the fact that at points he was a superstar last year for North Carolina. 23 points, 7 of 15 shooting, 2 of 5 from 3 against Louisville. 27 points against Notre Dame, 11 of 18 shooting from the field. 18 points against SMU, 21 points in a win over NC State, 20 points in a win over Cal. So I understand that by the end, he was not playing well. It does not change the fact that he has that 5-star pedigree and that, oh, by the way, when he was at his best, he was as good of a guard as there really kind of was in the ACC not playing for Duke. Doesn't mean that's who he was over the course of the season, but it is certainly there. And you think Rick Pitino can't get something out of him? I think so. I'll tell you this. I'll be honest. Outside of what I think I know, I don't know that, like, let me even backtrack. I'm not going to, whatever. The point I'm trying to make, this is the point I'm trying to get to. I don't know if he's going to commit on the spot, but I don't think it would be stunning if he did commit this weekend. Keep an eye out for this. By the way, credit John Rothstein was the first one to, I think, publicly have the report, but it was kind of known behind the scenes that it was going to happen. By the way, speaking of which, Torres on SJU for all your late breaking St. John's news. And we do have some Big Rick energy t-shirts, baby. Big Rick's got a lot of energy right now because he's bringing in the mega haul over the course of the weekend. You can get that t-shirt at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. Let's keep it going. Xaivian Lee to me is the X factor. A lot of people like this kid. Like I said, plays at Princeton, not Providence, like I said a minute ago. 6'4" guard, very interesting player because I think there were a lot of people that thought he would enter the portal after last season. 17 points per game a season ago for Xaivian Lee. This year, he comes back, very similar numbers. This past season, shoots 37% from 3. I think the big thing is he takes a lot of them, too. It's not like he's a player that, just kind of throws one up every once in a while. This is a guy that shot 37% from 3 on 5.5 attempts this year. Also, oh, by the way, had 5.5 assists per game as well. Why is that important? It fills 2 very important needs for St. John's because as good as Ian Jackson is, and I do think Ian Jackson will probably end up being part of the St. John's Red Storm next season, as good as Ian Jackson is, he's not a true point guard. And the one thing that St. John's is lacking right now is a true point guard, is a guy that can get the ball to others, but also what they're lacking is elite 3-point shooting. I think Ian Jackson helps that. I think Bryce Hopkins helps that. If you could somehow land Xaivian Lee, he's almost the perfect player for that spot because he gets the ball to others. He shoots the crap out of the ball. And those were the 2 things that you were missing last year, and you need a point guard. So Kadari Richmond was great, but Kadari Richmond couldn't shoot the ball. He would get the ball to others, but he couldn't shoot. This kid can do a little bit of both. It's worth noting, like, legitimate NBA draft prospect. I believe he's actually declared in his testing. The other thing, too, is I think his recruitment is a little bit more open. I think Duke is after him pretty good. The thing with Duke, they got some stuff to figure out on their end from their guard perspective. We know they're bringing in Caden Boozer. We know he's going to kind of run the point, but also, what about Tyrese Proctor? What about Caleb Foster? Are those 2 guys going to be part of Duke next year? So I think Duke's got some things to figure out. As of right now, by the way, we always say this in the portal, stuff is subject to change, but as of right now, no word yet on whether Tyrese Proctor or Caleb Foster will be back. So Xaivian Lee, to me, Duke is interesting. I think Florida is another team. Listen, Todd Golden proved it. You come here, I'm going to develop you. You're going to win at a high level. And the thing at Florida, they need guards right now. Front court is largely set with Chinyelu. Alex Condon could be back. Thomas Hawk could be back. Micah Hanlockton could be back. But the counter to that, Elijah Martin, Walter Clayton, Will Richard, all seniors. They're going to need guards. So, I don't ever want to doubt Rick Pitino. But this one I think is going to be a little bit more of an uphill battle. Let's keep it going with some other guys. Ozziah Sellers. So Ozziah Sellers is a player I really like. So he actually began his career at USC, final season under Andy Enfield. And, I think a lot of people know this, but I do live in Los Angeles now, grew up in Connecticut. But, again, another guy, I remember going to practices and being like, who's this kid? He's really good, very athletic. This is Isaiah Sellers I'm talking about. He's from California, 6'5", really a breakout year this year at Stanford, 14 points per game, as you can see on the screen, 40% shooting from three, but really he's kind of that quintessential 3-and-D wing. He's not like an NBA quintessential guy. He's probably about closer to 6'5", 6'6" than he is, 6'7", 6'8", whatever, doesn't really matter. But I'll tell you this, he's a guy that since he has entered the portal, I have heard buzz about St. John's. Another guy that just kind of fills a spot for that team. And I'll be curious, by the way, how many guys Pitino actually takes, because he's another one that's not a point guard, right? So does it come down to, is it Sellers or Ian Jackson? I'm guessing they would probably take both because they still need some guards. He is a very athletic player, kind of the player that Pitino loves. Pitino loves that super athletic guy that's going to defend his butt off. And the good thing about Isaiah Sellers is he does hit threes. So we will talk about that. We will talk about the fact that Isaiah Sellers is a guy that commits. And then finally, this straight from our Torres on SJU account, looks like Dylan Mitchell will officially begin his visit on Friday. So Dylan Mitchell is he's an interesting guy. Listen, you're careful how you say stuff like this, and I don't want to be disrespectful. Former McDonald's All-American, averaged just under 10 points and 7 rebounds per game this year. Crazy athlete, 6'8", crazy athlete. Crazy. Problem is he's not a great 3-point shooter. That's why he's still in college basketball. Remember, he was a McDonald's All-American, okay? Was a big recruiting win for Chris Beard at Texas. Chris Beard obviously gets fired. He stays at Texas. He, being Dylan Mitchell, for another year, decides to go to Cincinnati this past year. I think it worked out okay for him. But listen, I think Cincinnati, basically, he's a fourth-year guy, probably trying to get the biggest bag that he can. I don't blame him. He kind of is the 3-and-D guy minus the 3, super athletic. He can kind of play the 4, can kind of play the 3, whatever. And I think Pitino's into him. I don't know if he'd be my first call with the shooting problems that they had a year ago, but it doesn't change the fact that he will be on campus this weekend. So that is what the Mega Hall could potentially look like. Like I said, I think Ian Jackson could be on commit watch this weekend. We'll see about Sellers. We'll see about Mitchell. I think Xaivian Lee is going to take his time a little bit more. Again, Duke's in the mix, Florida's in the mix, etc. But I'll tell you what, there's a reason. I'll tell you this. There's a reason they're calling it the Mega Hall, okay? And it's because if Pitino pulls this off, I mean, I don't think it's hyperbole. Zuby Ejiofor, Bryce Hopkins, Ian Jackson, and let's say Xaivian Lee as your starting 5 with Isaiah Sellers. I'm trying to think. I don't know if it's preseason number 1, but it's pretty close. Whew! Big Rick energy, baby. Big Rick energy. Rick Pitino. Make sure you're following our Torres on SJU account. The Mega Hall. Big Rick energy. I'll tell you this, man. I'll just say this really quick. The OG St. John's fans that have followed me from the day that Pitino got hired, from before Pitino got hired, it is so cool to see this thing come to fruition. We talked about what he could potentially do if St. John's gave him the chance. He does it in year 2, Big East regular season title, Big East tournament title, and it is rolling beyond this. So excited to see how this weekend plays out. You're going to want to be following Torres on SJU for all your St. John's coverage.